It should just be silent.
I know, like the camera's speaking. That's not a good sign.
Yeah,
but
did it run out of something?
I think it like would cut if there's like inactivity. But we're back.
Okay, all right.
You know how people have different ideas of how they feel about a certain science, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's harder. And like you said, in psychology you have to deal more with people, and like when you're working with mice you don't have to do that a lot, and it's kind of like different battles, like this battles with the mice.
Totally different skill set. Like working with mice, a lot of times you're fighting like some people just like might be grossed out by that, right? Like and you get messy. Like they don't use restrooms. They just go wherever they are at the moment, sometimes in your hand or something. So it gets messy. It gets gross. And if you're looking at their brains, you have to do some gruesome things to get to them. So that's its own kind of challenge and whatever. And there's a lot of boredom to just putting a mouse in a box and waiting, or like watching over hours sometimes. And those are challenges that people working with humans don't necessarily face at the same level. But they have so many challenges we don't. Like I did human research when I was an undergrad for like a year, and our no-show rate was like 50%.
Oh,
like there were sometimes, and this was like a half an hour, 45-minute experiment. So like, if 2 people in a row didn't show up, I was just like sitting there bored for a couple hours, like with like nothing to show for it at the end, which was so frustrating. So
I guess you're frustrated and bored in different ways.
Yeah, in different ways. Of course, I'm doing my homework because I was a student, but like, still, it's just like I had to get so many. I only have so many hours in a day to schedule subjects. I have to get so many run by a certain time to finish my project. And if people don't show up, it's like, how do I get them into my lab? Right. They're easy. You just place an order, pay for them, they show up.
Right, exactly.
then go get them from their cages, put them in whatever chamber you need. Do it. It's easy.
You don't sometimes wish that you could put people just like mice in cages as well. There you go. You're right.
I mean, I'm not going to say that on camera, but
yeah.
It sure would make that research easier, let's say.
For sure. Without having to chase people around.
No, I should say that I don't think the data from those people would be very usable, because they'd be miserable having to live in a cage. But
like Stanford experiment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's actually a great example, though, because it's coming out more and more, or at least I'm seeing more and more things written about it in the last 5 years. But there were just a couple subjects in that experiment that figured out thought they figured out what the experimenter wanted, and like played it up like crazy. Like especially one subject, while he was like the officer or whatever, was doing a lot of the abusive behaviors and all that kind of stuff, and like really fouled up the data and made it look way worse than it really were, like a much bigger effect than it actually was. And of course there's the ethics of the experimenter. He might have known that and used his data anyway, didn't throw that guy's data out. But that's a uniquely human challenge, right? That they can sometimes behave in ways that they think we want them to, and really give us the wrong answers to what we're trying to get at.
He was biased, and then so therefore he made up the data to fit like whatever he believed in.
Like one of the subjects in there figured out that, I don't remember the name of the researcher anymore for some reason. I'm terrible with names, I'm blanking, but really acted out a ton while he was the guard, because he realized that that's the effect the researcher was going for.
Oh,
so he was doing all like that? Yeah. Well, I don't know if he can. I think he did later confess it. But if you watch, like I've seen video footage of the experiment because they were recording it on camera, and there's like one guy that's like driving most of it, and other people are kind of following along with him a bit to an extent. But there's one guy that's just crazy over the top, and it's pretty. I mean, you at least like to believe that one guy was play acting a bit and realized that that's what the person wanted, and he wasn't just a crazy person. But
yeah,
maybe he was, but still, it was one outlier that drove a lot of the effects that were reported from that. Like, it's not that drastic. People won't necessarily become horrible, abusive people just because they are put in a position of power.
Oh,
At
that's
least
so
not to the level.
interesting.
At least not to the level that was reported in that study. I mean,
And
I don't remember if he's confessed that he was like play acting it and like hamming it up, but he was certainly far like if he was acting, you know, as he felt he should, rather than like trying to make an effect. He was affected by it far more than anybody else was in the study.
right, so how
So,
can
he's an outlier.
as an experimenter, how can you tell whether or not that's just him acting up way far more than like people anticipated, or it's actually like the effect of the role of authority? And I guess it relates back to how like a lot of psych study, like we investigate like the mere exposure effect. People become more familiar and grow more fond of each other whenever they're close to each other in proximity. But is that always necessarily true? And a lot of people say that like, or refer to psych as the quote unquote softer science, because it's not like solid, like, oh,
Right.
if this is a study, then therefore it's going to apply to across all
Yeah.
aspects.
Yeah, it isn't
And-
like chemistry where it's like every
Right.
time you put chemical A next to chemical B with the right heat and whatever, they make a molecule.
Yeah,
right?
they make exactly
yeah,
this.
they make the same thing every time. It's not that precise, right?
Right, like I can't
Um,
use your study of like, oh, because people are gonna like each other, it's thanks
Right.
to mere exposure effect. Therefore, if I wanna like, be a cupid for two people, I'm gonna
Yeah.
just make them live together, and
Yeah.
it's gonna for sure be.
You have no guarantee of success. They may end up hating each other because proximity can also make people who are more different really hate each other more.
As seen in quarantine.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That's been a big natural experiment lately, right? But yeah, you're right. That
Like it's not like chemistry. It's like this.
it's not chemistry where it's obvious
Yeah.
because there are so many other mediating variables there, right? What makes two people, you know, attracted or just get closer, whether it's romantically or not, is it is driven in part by proximity, right, and exposure, and how much you have in common. But there's a lot of other things, right? There's even like, there's just like, I mean, we're not supposed to have pheromones, right? But people seem to respond to other people in like more primal ways, right? Like it's like I don't know what it is exactly. Like we're
there's
not
no
supposed-
exact like formula.
Yeah, like it, and there is like body language that some people might respond to well and other people won't. Little subtleties in people's behavior that for one person is going to be really annoying and for another one will be really endearing. Like it's there's so much more complex stuff going on between us socially to figure out, you know, to play Cupid and like trying to put two people together is like really, really difficult, at least, like if not impossible. But we can say that two people put in proximity are more likely to become close than two people not put in proximity together. Like that's somewhat universally true, but it's couched in the more likely to, not will absolutely be.
Right. It's
be
not like
closer.
the quote unquote harder or like biology or physics or chemistry where you have like a more.
Yeah,
Definite
it's
answer.
not. There aren't rules and laws, you know. Like there's no set formula for like. There are just lots of things you can do to put the odds in your favor of having the outcome you want. But there's really almost nothing in psychology where you can guarantee that outcome is what you'll get.
Right. Psychology doesn't really give you a definite answer. Like you can use one study and their theory and their results,
Right.
but you can't really like apply that everywhere. Like you have all these theories and it seems like they would say like wishy-washy or fluffy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like all definite. Like if you cook pasta like this, like chemistry was,
It's
and you're
gonna get soft, right? It's gonna.
Yeah, if you boil
it's
pasta,
gonna go
water's gonna go
from
soft.
being hard and firm to soft. It's gonna absorb the water, and yeah, it like there are very few laws in psychology that we know of that are like that predictable. People see that like that it's not predictable and like think it's easier or something because they feel like you can just make things up. Like I could pretty much make, within reason, if I'm like an English scholar or something, or like a literature scholar, right? I could like pretty much put any lens to any text and come out with something and reasonable and back it up with textual evidence and all that sort of thing. And I'm not trying to criticize, literary scholars, but that's kind of, I think, where we get lumped in with, where it's like, okay, but yeah, so if it's that wishy-washy, then you could just like really rationalize anything, right? But that's not really true. Because there are things that just won't work. Like opposites are less likely to attract than people that are similar. Like even though we all have that idea in our head of like that odd couple that we know or something that seem completely opposite, A, they're probably not as different as we think, and B, they're an exception to the rule, they're not the rule. So there are things that we just can't support. And it becomes harder to work within a wishy-washy kind of a field. Because a lot of times you're trying to build castles on shifting sands. You're trying to build up a framework from something that's not as stable as like a chemical reaction.
Yeah.
Right. If I was gonna try to work from proximity to, would you call the theory like close proximity theory? I don't even know what it's called because I'm not a social psychologist. Mere exposure. Yeah. If I was gonna like work from there to like a larger structure of like love or something like that, right? Like some larger concept, I'm building all that extra structure on like really shifting sands, which makes it harder. It's not impossible, but it makes it harder to do, not easier. It's easier if you can build on chemical reactions, right? Because you at least know a core of truth at the bottom of this that you can build on top of and then get a new layer of truth on and build on that. But this is like, okay, this is 80% likely, and then I'm building on 60% likely, and I'm building on 30% likely, and by the time I'm up here, I'm at like 10% likely, and all these other things have to come through as well for that to be true. So it's actually harder. And that's why we do so much statistics, because people in biology and chemistry and physics and stuff, they don't use statistics anywhere near as much as we do, at least not in the same probabilistic way that like we're doing it in class and things like that, and we'll do more next semester in Learning Lab. They don't necessarily have like a null hypothesis and look for a p-value less than 0.05 and stuff like that, because they have really obvious effects because they're not so variable. We deal with more variability than pretty much any other field in science, and that's actually more challenging.
Because we deal with people. Yes,
exactly. And even animals, like, well, obviously people are animals, but like even rodents and stuff like that are more variable than like molecules are, so it actually makes it harder.
That's a very interesting take on this, because now you're arguing that it's actually like a harder science.
It's a more difficult science to do. It's a more difficult science to do, I think.
You know how like you said like, oh, you build up like theory one for like a certain amount of percentage, and then like still is like kind of unstable, but you continue on building for it. Is there a situation or scenario where you have to like, or has there been a theory where psychologically it's been like this, but people debunked it completely, and now like you just start from scratch?
You just knock down the castle and start rebuilding?
Yep.
Yeah, those are paradigm shifts, really, is what you're talking about. Because what you're doing is like really building a paradigm, and then eventually you get to the point where that paradigm doesn't support your theory anymore. And I think we're getting there in neuroscience with the computer model of the brain. Like that whole analogy and this whole like, this is like the working memory is like the RAM of the computer, and then the hard drive is like the long-term storage, and the processing speed and this and that, and that all works really nicely on a very superficial level, but the closer you get down to the actual network and the wiring and the fact that computers can process like just near infinite amounts of information at the same time in parallel, and brains can't, really starts to break down there, because computers can multitask. Brains cannot multitask. very well at all. They could do some simple multitasking, like I can think and breathe at the same time. I can think and breathe and digest food and beat my heart and all that kind of stuff. Like I can do those things at the same time. But like higher cognitive functions are pretty much like one at a time. And anything that looks like multitasking is usually really fast switching between tasks.